Imagine you wake up tomorrow and every law is gone. No police, no courts, no punishment. Nothing written down that says what you can and cannot do. At first, maybe that sounds like freedom. But think about it for one more second. If someone stronger than you decides they want your home, your food, or your life, who stops them? There is no one to call. There is no rule to point to. There is only you and whoever is stronger. This wasn't a thought experiment for our ancestors. For almost the entire human story, this was simply the world. There were no laws. There were no judges. There was no such thing as a crime. And yet somehow humans didn't tear each other apart. Somehow we built villages, then towns, then the first great cities. So how did we do it? What did humans actually do before laws existed? The answer is one of the most fascinating stories in all of human history. And it begins not with a king, but with a campfire. Let's go back, way back, tens of thousands of years, to a small band of humans living together on the open land. Here's something surprising. For a group this small, they didn't need laws, and they didn't have any. When everyone in your world is someone you know, your family, the people you hunt with, the people you'll depend on tomorrow, you don't need a written rule to tell you not to steal from them. If you did, everyone would know. Everyone would see. And the punishment wasn't a court or a prison. The punishment was much simpler and much more terrifying. It was being cast out. In a world of predators, cold, and hunger, no single human survived alone. Your group was your food, your warmth, your protection, your entire life. To be pushed out of it was, very often, a death sentence. So the first thing that kept humans in line was not law, it was belonging. The fear of losing your people was stronger than any written punishment could ever be. Behave, and you were safe. Break the trust of the group, and you could lose everything. This is the invisible force that held humanity together for tens of thousands of years. Not rules on a page, reputation, shame, and the simple, powerful need to belong. But this quiet system had a hidden weakness. And as humans grew more successful, that weakness became impossible to ignore. It only worked when everyone knew everyone. Picture your group slowly growing. A handful of families becomes a village becomes a town. And one day, you walk through your own settlement and you see a face you don't recognize. A stranger. Now the old system breaks. You can't shame a stranger. They don't care what you think of them. You can't threaten to cast them out. They were never truly in. When you have hundreds, then thousands of people living side by side, most of them strangers, everyone will know simply stops working, and a new dangerous problem appears. What happens when two people disagree and there is no shared family to settle it? One says the goat is his, the other swears it's hers. In a small band, the group would work it out. But between strangers, with no rule to appeal to, there is only one way left to settle it: violence. And here is the trap. If you hit me, my brothers come for you. Then your brothers come for them. A single argument between two people becomes a feud between two families that can burn for generations. This cycle of revenge, an injury for an injury, a death for a death, was one of the greatest threats early societies ever faced. It could destroy a community from the inside. Humans needed a way out. They needed something bigger than any single family. They needed a rule that applied to everyone, the strong and the weak, the neighbor and the stranger alike. They needed law. But before the very first law was ever carved into stone, humans found a clever, invisible solution, and we still use it every single day. They made the rules feel bigger than any human. Long before written law, communities were held together by custom and by belief. These were the unwritten laws, passed down not on tablets, but in stories, in tradition, in the voice of the elders. Do not eat this. Do not marry that person. Honor this ritual. Fear this spirit. And here was the genius of it. These rules weren't presented as one person's opinion. They were sacred. They came from the ancestors, from the gods, from the very order of the world itself. And that changed everything. Because you can argue with your neighbor, But how do you argue with the gods? When a rule is just a man's command, the next strong man can simply ignore it. But when a rule is holy, breaking it isn't just a crime against a person, it's a crime against the universe. This is why, in nearly every ancient culture, the earliest laws and the earliest religions are tangled together. Belief was the first courtroom, and it was powerful enough to hold thousands of strangers to a shared set of rules, without a single police officer in sight. But belief alone had a flaw too. Customs could be forgotten. Stories could change with each retelling. Two elders could remember the same tradition in two different ways. To rule a real city, humans needed something permanent, something that couldn't be argued with, or twisted, or forgotten. They needed to take the law out of memory and freeze it in stone. And that brings us to one of the most remarkable objects ever discovered. Most people, if you ask them about the first laws, will name the Code of Hammurabi, the famous eye for an eye. But Hammurabi wasn't first, not even close. 3 centuries before him, in the Sumerian city of Ur, in what is now Iraq, a king named Ur-Nammu had his laws written onto clay tablets. This, the Code of Ur-Nammu, from around 2100 to 2050 BC, is the oldest written law code that has ever survived. And when you read it, something astonishing jumps out. The laws are written in a pattern you would instantly recognize. If a man commits this crime, then this is the punishment. If, then. If, then. It's the exact same logical structure we still use today, in our courts, in our contracts, and even in the code that runs your phone. But the real surprise is how thoughtful these ancient laws were. We imagine the ancient world as brutal, ruled only by an eye for an eye. Yet the Code of Ur-Nammu, 3 centuries older than Hammurabi, was gentler. For many injuries, it didn't demand blood, it demanded payment. If you hurt someone, you paid a fine, in silver, to make it right. Think about what that means. Someone, 4,000 years ago, looked at the endless cycle of revenge, the feud that destroys families, and found a way to break it. Instead of blood for blood, they wrote, "Pay, and let it end here." That single idea, that a wrong could be settled with compensation instead of vengeance, is one of the quiet foundations of civilization itself. And Ur-Nammu's laws did something even more powerful. They promised, in the king's own words, that the orphan would not be handed over to the rich, and the widow would not be handed over to the powerful. The whole point of the law was to protect the weak from the strong, to be the shield that a lonely person could stand behind when they had no family to defend them. For the first time in history, justice didn't depend on how many brothers you had. It depended on the law. And once this idea appeared, it spread, because it worked. In Babylon, King Hammurabi carved his famous code onto a towering black stone, placed in public for all to see, so that no one could claim they didn't know the rules. In Greece, laws were written down so that a single powerful man could no longer twist them to his liking, the beginning of the radical idea that the law should be the same for everyone. In Rome, citizens demanded their laws be written on public tablets, so ordinary people could no longer be crushed by rulers who kept the rules a secret. And far to the east, in India, the Emperor Ashoka carved his laws, his edicts of justice and mercy, onto massive stone pillars, and sent officials across his empire to read them aloud to people who could not read, so that everyone, everywhere, would know. Look at what all these cultures, separated by thousands of miles, understood. A law is only powerful if people know it. A secret rule protects no one. A rule carved in stone in public for all to see, that is a promise that cannot be quietly broken. So, what did humans do before laws existed? They leaned on each other. They belonged to each other. They kept each other in line with shame, with story, with belief, and with the deep human need to not be cast out and alone. And when their world grew too big for that, when strangers filled their cities and revenge threatened to tear them apart, they did something extraordinary. They invented a new kind of power. Not the power of the strongest arm, but the power of a shared rule that stood above everyone. The next time you follow a law without even thinking about it, stopping at a red light, signing your name, trusting that a promise will be kept, remember where it came from. It didn't begin in a modern courtroom. It began with a small band of humans around a fire, learning to trust one another. It began with a story told by an elder to keep the peace. It began with a Sumerian king, 4,000 years ago, pressing into wet clay a single revolutionary idea: that we could be ruled not by force, but by fairness. We didn't just invent laws to control each other, we invented them to protect each other. And we're still writing them today.